Hi friends, my name is Katya. Welcome back to my channel. I have so many books to review today. I'm going to be talking about the books that I've read in the last 3 months, give or take. And I'm going to do my best to run through these pretty quickly, giving my pros and cons, obviously, as always. But I do have to pick someone up from the airport in an hour, so we've got to keep her moving. I've got half an iced chai left to give me some energy. But before we get into that first book, if you're new here and you like balanced book reviews where people talk about the good things and the bad things so that you can really get a good comprehensive idea of if you'll like the book, then this is the channel for you and you should like and subscribe and stick around. But without further ado, the first book that I'm going to talk about is Beautyland by Helene Bertini. This is a sci-fi novel, but it reads more as literary fiction. We follow a character named Adina who, when she's a child, gains this consciousness that she is not of this world. She's actually a being from another planet who was sent to Earth to send reports back to her people. So as you're reading through the book, which covers her entire life, you're just seeing her grow up and learn to be a person and interact with her family and friends, but the whole time she's sending faxes back to her alien relatives, and they come visit her in her sleep and they're able to tell her what exactly they want her to report on. And for the most part, it's just why people are the way they are. And so the book ends up being a lot of meditations on what humanity means and what experiences are relatable and uniting as people. I thought this was a really beautiful book, but it was also very sad and really lonely at times. There were times that it made me feel very moved, and there were times that it made me feel very empty. So there were really big pendulum swings in terms of emotions, which could be good or bad, I guess, depending on your opinion, but I was grateful that this book made me feel so much. On the other hand, since it is following Adina's entire life, there are swaths of the book that can move very slowly. Next, I read Rebel Witch, which is the sequel to Heartless Hunter. Heartless Hunter is one of my favorite books I've read so far this year. I raved about it back in my mid-year book freak out, my favorite books of the year, all of those videos about the way that it gripped me and didn't let me go when I finished it in a few hours because I loved it so much. So I went into Rebel Witch with very high expectations, and I went into it very nervously because I never expect a sequel to live up to a first book that I loved that much. And in some ways I was right. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. Although the romance at the heart of the story will always be my favorite thing about it, the relationship between Gideon and Rune is so just electric. I love their chemistry, I love their dynamic, but I think in terms of the larger plot, there were a few too many conveniences, and especially the ending felt a little too easy considering all of the buildup in the background and the things that had led to the conflict. However, that being said, I will definitely be picking up anything else this author writes in the future, particularly if it's an enemies to lovers romance, because I think she wrote the tension expertly. This is one of my favorite romantic relationships I've read about all year. Speaking of romance, I also read Two Can Play by Ali Hazelwood. This is a novella that I listened to on audio. We follow Viola and Jesse, who work for different companies, but now those companies are coming together to work on one video game, and there's been some rivalry between the companies, so their bosses send them on a wintry retreat as a team building exercise. Now Viola and Jesse, despite the fact that they are arch nemesis, are forced to interact a lot with each other, especially when the cabin becomes snowed in. This book was definitely a fun listen. I think my biggest issue with it is that there was so little conflict that when I got to the end of the book, I didn't realize that it had ended because I kept expecting more. I was like, wait a second, where's the conflict? What's the issue? And there really was none. It was just they disliked each other, they talked about it, now they like each other, and that just wasn't enough for me to justify the story existing. Again, it's not that it's bad by any means, but a very middle of the road romance. I read Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book is about female astronauts in the 1980s space shuttle program. We particularly follow our main character named Joan and the way that she navigates this very male-dominated field, as well as some drama in her personal life. Joan has a niece named Frances who she cares a lot for, and really takes her under her wing when her mom is a little bit absent. And we also watch Joan fall in love with one of her fellow astronauts, Vanessa, and the way that they have to kind of keep that relationship under wraps in order to protect their jobs in case anyone will react to them with any sort of prejudice or stigma. I went into this book expecting something very exciting. You know, you hear astronauts astronauts, you expect to be spending some time in space, but I ended up getting something quite slow moving. And that would have been fine, but I think my biggest issue with the book was its structure. You start off opening chapter with a very exciting, dangerous space shuttle disaster where there are a lot of deaths and a lot of quite gruesome deaths. And then the book flashes back in time a couple years before the space shuttle disaster happens so that we can see all the lead up, and we're introduced to all of these characters that we know already from that first chapter are going to die. And so that made it tricky for me to really feel invested in a lot of them. I think in general I would have liked to get a little bit more from those side characters and to have gotten to know them before I learned that they died so that I cared more when they died. But more than anyone else, the book really focuses on Joan. She's obsessed with the stars, she's dreamed of going to space, but really I think the ultimate message of the book was that the things that Joan learned that she cared about the most were not the stars or like doing something big and important and exciting with her life, but rather focusing on the people that she loved and spending time with them. That is a very simple, lovely message, but I found it was kind of difficult for this book to really hold my attention. I will say I really liked the ending scene in particular. It made me tear up. I thought it was very impactful and well done, but the book as a whole I found to be pretty average, so I gave it 3 stars. One Golden Summer is a summer romance which follows Charlie and Alice. Alice is a photographer trying to unlock some creativity because she's been feeling pretty uninspired lately, so she's going to stay at a lake house with her grandmother. Her grandmother had a fall, I think, or some kind of accident a couple months ago, and so Alice is very, very worried about her and uses this time at the lake house to not only like take care of her and spend some time with her, but also to revisit these childhood memories that she has of picking up a camera for the first time and falling in love with photography. Now, while she's at this lake house, she meets a neighbor named Charlie, and the two of them start interacting more and more and slowly starting to fall for each other, but for some reason Charlie is very anti-relationship. I went into this book with kind of low expectations because I didn't love the previous book in this series, which follows Charlie's brother, and so I went into this like a little bit nervous, but I ended up loving it. I liked the characters, but more than that I liked just the setting and the vibes. The lake house coastal energy was exactly what I wanted to be reading in the late summer, and although the book could be pretty slow at times, I think that that worked in its favor because it felt like those long summer days when I was growing up, and every summer day would bleed into the next and I wasn't sure what day it was sometimes because there was just nothing to do but relax. That's the kind of lazy summer feeling I got from this book, and that was such a cool feeling for it to be able to capture because that more than anything else made it feel like summer. In terms of negatives, I could sometimes be baffled by these characters' decisions and their inability to communicate with each other. I know it's realistic, but in this case I was a little bit upset about one of the things that Charlie didn't share with Alice because I thought that it was important and something that he should probably tell her. But other than that, great characters, great vibes. I definitely would recommend, especially in the summertime. I wish that I had read it earlier in the summer, but I definitely loved it. Next is Open Throat by Henry Hoke. I listened to this on audio, and this was a really fascinating, unique book, I think. We follow a mountain lion. The entire book is narrated from the perspective of this mountain lion, and he kind of spends the entire book unpacking his feelings about what it means to be an animal and what it means to be a human. He observes all of these different humans throughout the book and observes their animalistic tendencies, the way that he as an animal is like a human. There was a line in the book where he was saying, I feel more like a person than ever because I'm starting to hate myself, like that kind of commentary on what people are like. So I really enjoyed this story. I thought it was super unique. The ending got a little trippy, a little weird. I wasn't entirely sure what was real and what was imagined, but it did make for a very engaging story. Definitely would recommend. I read 3 Sarah J. Maas books in this period. I read Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn, which are the 2 books that take place on the same timeline. So I did what they call the tandem read, which is where you take a couple chapters at a time back and forth and read them at the same time, which I was very nervous to do, but I ended up being very glad that I did because then the books that both take place at the same time felt like one big epic book rather than a book that follows these people over here and then a book that follows these people over here. So I liked it being all combined. There was a guide that I found online that I was able to follow of like at which point to switch chapters, which I really appreciated. I gave both of these books 4 stars, although I personally preferred Tower of Dawn because I was a big fan of the Kale-Irene relationship. And then I also read Kingdom of Ash, which is the finale to the Throne of Glass series. This I thought was fine. I almost feel like we followed too many characters. We could have lost a couple POVs and I would have been fine. I also, and this is just personal preference, don't love reading about battles. Like, my eyes glaze over a little bit when I know that there's going to be a battle or some kind of war scene in a book, and this had definitely more than the previous books did, so I found myself getting a little bit bored. Switching gears to a different, a little bit more recent romantasy, I read Spark of the Everflame. This book follows our main character named DM. She lives in a poor village that is ruled over by an upper class called the Descended. The Descended are half god, and so they have these powers, but the Descended really oppress and look down upon the regular human people. Now, at the beginning of the book, DM's mother disappeared. Her mother was a healer, and it's now been months since anyone has seen her, and so DM begins working as a healer in her stead and going to care for the Descended as her mother once did. I mostly enjoyed this book. I liked DM as a main character. I liked the world, although it did feel reminiscent of other fantasy novels that I've read in the past. It didn't really feel like much was new or reinventing the wheel by any means, but it was a pretty solid fantasy, very slow burn. I feel like we only got little snippets of what will eventually become a full-fledged romance in future books. The big reveal of this book was incredibly predictable, but I did have fun on the journey to it, so it's still a book that I would recommend. I do have one DNF to talk about. This is Wavewalker. It's a memoir about a woman who, growing up, lived at sea with her family. Her father really wanted to adventure and travel the world, and so instead of sending them to school, their parents took her and her siblings and had them live on this ship and travel the world for years and years and years, and definitely gave them a very unique experience, but it was also an experience that the author really pushed against as she got older because she wanted to go to traditional school. I think the big issue with this book is that it was very, very repetitive, and that repetitiveness made it boring. The second big issue was that the author didn't really give any commentary about how she was feeling about different things as they were happening. The writing style is very, very matter of fact and not very reflective, which is usually what I like and look for in a memoir. I want people not just telling me their experiences, but reflecting on those experiences and how they affected them. But the book was really more just this happened and then this happened and then this happened and then this happened. And that didn't make for an enjoyable reading experience for me. And so I ended up quitting reading it, DNFing at like, I want to say 3/4 of the way through. I just couldn't force myself to finish it. When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy is a horror novel about our main character named Jess. She's a struggling actress who one day after her job at a restaurant ends up coming home and finding a little boy hiding in the bushes by her apartment. She soon learns that the boy is on the run from a terrifying monster and does her best throughout the book to protect him. This book was a wild ride. I'm telling you, in the first chapter, I could not have possibly expected it to go the ways that it did. Even like halfway through, I could not possibly have expected it to go the ways that it did. I'm very, very hesitant to give literally anything away. Even that description that I gave you is like the barest bones possible, because I just really want everybody to read this and experience this, because it was so trippy, so fun, really genuinely scary to me. And I'm saying that like with the caveat that I am a very easily scared person, but this was like an existential kind of scared rather than a jump scare kind of scared. I think this is one of my favorite books that I've read all year, which is very huge considering that horror is not typically my genre, but I gave this 5 stars. Definitely highly recommend. Mate by Ali Hazelwood is the sequel to her paranormal romance Bride. That book was a vampire werewolf romance, and this book is a werewolf half werewolf romance. We follow our main character Serena, who we met in the previous book, and there have recently been, for reasons that I won't get too into right now, some threats on her life, and so for her safety she goes to live in the Pacific Northwest with the Northwest Werewolf Pack under the care of an alpha named Cohen. Now in Bride, we met Cohen and got to know that he might be interested romantically in Serena, but in this book early on that almost completely disappears because he says he cannot have any sort of relationship with her and he is not interested, and what is she talking about? Go away, I don't like you. That's kind of the vibe. So the book is about Serena and Cohen getting to know each other. The ice is starting to break, starting to thaw, but it's also about Serena learning about what it means to be a werewolf. She's only found out very recently that she is half werewolf, and so she ends up learning a lot about herself and about her past. There is a plot in this book that surrounds a cult, which was so exciting. I'm nervous to like give away too too much about this book, particularly because it is a sequel, but I really enjoyed it. I think just as much, if not just a little bit less than that first book. I think my biggest issue was in the romance. The romance is very sex focused, very physical, and although their chemistry is so passionate, so intense, so animalistic and fun to read, I would have liked to get just a little bit more from their emotional side and see like a friendship connection, an emotional connection, a spiritual connection, and I just didn't really feel like we got any of that beyond like we're fated werewolf mates, which is not like my favorite trope. Overdue by Stephanie Perkins follows Ingrid. She works in a library and she's been dating her boyfriend for 11 years, but then Ingrid's little sister gets engaged after 2 years, and Ingrid and Corey are inspired to really take a look at their relationship and whether it's going to be moving forward into marriage or not, and they end up deciding that they're going to take a 1-month break off from each other so that they can date other people and see what else is out there before getting back together and deciding if they're going to get engaged or not. I was very excited to read this book because I've liked Stephanie Perkins books in the past, but unfortunately this ended up being so boring and so underwhelming. We get so much detail into Ingrid's everyday life. It's kind of, I guess, similar to Wavewalker, where it's like I did this and then I did this and then I did this and then I did this, and that style of writing where I learned what she had for breakfast and what her drive was like and what this person was like is just like not for me at all. I found that that level of detail made the book move very slowly, and on top of that, the romantic relationship that ends up being the ultimate romantic relationship of this book was not one that I necessarily found myself rooting for because the male love interest was so incredibly passive. I think they describe him in the book as being shy, which is fine, but it was like the whole book goes on and he doesn't make any sort of moves or give any indication that he has interest in her, and I just like don't have the patience for that. I found it like very irritating, and so I had a hard time rooting for this romance. I did like that Ingrid goes through a career change. It was interesting to see all of the steps that she took to make that happen, but on the other hand, I was kind of sad to see her leaving libraries as somebody who has libraries as such like a special close place in my heart. But yeah, overall I was pretty bummed with this book. It took me a very long time to read and I ultimately gave it 2 stars. I think if I hadn't bought it, it definitely would have been a DNF. Servant of Earth by Sarah Hawley, ending on a high note. I loved this book. Our protagonist is a character named Kenna who lives in a village where women are chosen to be sent across this bog that leads to the Fae realm. Now, it's said to be chosen is a huge honor, and once you make it across the bog, you'll live with the Fae, who the villagers see as these like god-like figures, and they expect the women to marry Fae princes and become nobility and live very fancy, fulfilled, upper-class lives. Now, Kenna, who has spent a lot of time in the bog and exploring the bog, is convinced that this is all superstition and that the women who are sent across the bog don't really actually make it, but they die there. So when her best friend gets chosen as one of the women to go to the Fae world, Kenna decides to accompany the women to do her best to protect them in this very dangerous bog. I loved Kenna as a main character. I thought she was really witty and really strong, but not in an obnoxious way. I think a lot of times fantasy heroines can get a little bit insufferable in the way that they're like, I'm strong and tough and feral. And in this book, even though she had those descriptions, there was so much balance to her character, and I found myself really rooting for her. There is a huge cast of characters in this book, and a lot of them are really complicated, and I appreciated not only that complexity, but also the way that Kenna's opinions and thoughts about them changed as more and more information was revealed. I probably would have given this 5 stars, except that I found some of the things in the end to be pretty predictable, but although I predicted them, I did enjoy the ride. Alright, that brings us to the end of this video. Please let me know about some books that you've read recently that you really enjoyed. I would love to add some things to my TBR. Please comment down below a fairy emoji if you made it to the end so that I know who stuck around. Thank you so much for watching this video and spending time with me. I really appreciate you. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of the next time I post a video, and I will see you in the next one.